Hey, this is Joshua from the church at Mon River. Thanks for taking time to listen to this teaching. We have one purpose here, and that is to make followers of Jesus. And we hope that this recording helps accomplish this purpose in your life.
So 1 Samuel chapter 24. When Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the wilderness near En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 of Israel's fit young men and went to look for David and his men in front of the rocks of the wild goats. When Saul came to the sheep pens along the road, a cave was there, and he went in to relieve himself. David and his men were staying in the recesses of the cave. So they said to him, Look, this is the day the Lord told you about. I will hand your enemy over to you so you can do to him whatever you desire. Then David got up and secretly cut off the corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the corner of Saul's robe. He said to his men, I swear before the Lord, I would never do such a thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed. I will never lift my hand against him since he is the Lord's anointed. With these words, David persuaded his men, and he did not let them rise up against Saul. Then Saul left the cave and went to his way. After that, David got up, went out of the cave, and called to Saul, My Lord the king. When Saul looked behind him, David knelt low with his face to the ground and paid homage. David said to Saul, Why do you listen to the words of people who say, Look, David intends to harm you? You see with your own eyes that the Lord handed you over to me today in the cave. Someone advised me to kill you, but I took pity on you and said, I won't lift my hand against my Lord since he is the Lord's anointed. Look, my father, look at the corner of your robe in my hand, for I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. Recognize that I've committed no crime or rebellion. I haven't sinned against you, even though you were hunting me down to take my life. May the Lord judge between me and you, and may the Lord take vengeance on you for me. But my hand will never be against you. As the old proverb says, wickedness comes from wicked people. My hand will never be against you. Who has the king of Israel come after? What are you chasing after? A dead dog? A single flea? May the Lord be judged and decide between you and me. May he take notice and plead my case and deliver me from you. When David finished saying these things to him, Saul replied, Is that your voice, David, my son? Then Saul wept aloud and said to David, You are more righteous than I, for you have done what is good to me, though I have done what is evil to you. You yourself had told me today what good you did for me. When the Lord handed me over to you, you didn't kill me. When a man finds his enemy, does he let him go unharmed? May the Lord repay you with good for what you've done for me today. Now I know for certain you will be king, and the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. Therefore, swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family. So David swore to Saul. Then Saul went back home, and David and his men went up to the stronghold. Church, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Well, in the story that we are looking at today in 1 Samuel chapter 24 and also in chapter 26, we see that King Saul is trying to kill David. It's this young man, young general, and David did nothing wrong. Saul's just this irrational, angry leader. He felt threatened by David and his rising popularity. And so he decided that David needed to die. He goes to great lengths to hunt David down and kill him and his men. I'm sure for most of us here, we don't have someone who's trying to kill you. If so, you might not want to be here this morning. You might want to go find a hiding place. But I'm sure that we can all sympathize with these feelings of being unjustly wronged. You just want to go about your life in peace, but there's just that one person that is always making that difficult for you. They just won't let up. I think about, for me, there's a guy that is a baseball coach as well, and recently he came to me. I don't even know this guy. It was the first conversation I'd had with him. He came to me and he asked a question, and I didn't give him the exact answer that he wanted, and suddenly in the conversation, he starts raising his voice and moving closer to me. Oh, no. If I wasn't calm in the moment, it would have turned into a fight right there in the middle of the meeting. And to make things worse, the next meeting I showed up to, a friend of mine came to me, and my friend was asking me about this conversation that I had. Apparently, this guy had went to my friend and was saying bad things about me and was recounting the situation very differently than it actually happened. It frustrated me so much. In the moment, I'm wanting to defend myself to my friend. I want to get this guy's number and call him up and be like, dude, what's the deal? I'm sure for you, you probably have similar situations. You might think about a roommate or maybe a neighbor of yours that you had some minor conflict with. Now they won't talk to you. Maybe you feel like you always have to walk on eggshells around this person. Maybe for you, it's a coworker. This person is just a pain to be around. They make everyone's life at work difficult. They make a whole bunch of unnecessary comments. They badmouth you to other people any chance that they get. These sort of things can even happen in Christian circles, Christian organizations. About someone in our church, somewhere where they serve, and just this one person that's really difficult to interact with. They just come off harsh all the time, and they just always have to be right. I want you to think about your life. Who is that person that comes to your mind when I talk about this? I invite you just to write that person's initials down at the top of your notes if you're taking them. We'll come back to this here later on. We see in 1 Samuel 24 and 26 how David responds to Saul, who's trying to kill him. Saul, this irrational king who's hunting him down. As we look at this text today, we will see that David treated his adversary in an unexpected way. David treated his adversary in an unexpected way. As we look at this passage, we're going to see how David treated Saul. Then we're also going to look at the book of Psalms, these poems that David wrote during this time. And we're going to consider what David was thinking that allowed him to respond to Saul different than how people would normally react. To get into this narrative in chapter 24, Saul had heard that David had been spotted in a nearby town. So he gathers together 3,000 soldiers. He goes to look for David and his measly 400 soldiers. And as Saul and his army are searching for David, Saul has to go to the bathroom. These days, there's no internal plumbing, so he goes to a cave. He's there in the privacy of this cave all by himself, and he squats down and he's going number 2. The crazy thing is, it just so happens to be the very cave that David and his men are hiding in. They're hiding deeper in the cave, back in the shadows. I just imagine that you are one of David's soldiers. And this guy, Saul, has been chasing you all over the country. You're hungry. You're tired. You've been away from your family for a long time. And as soon as this guy is dead, your leader becomes the king, and all of a sudden you get a promotion. And here he is, right in front of you. He's caught literally with his pants down. He has no clue that he is surrounded. What would you do? We see what David's men want to do. Say, look, this is the day the Lord told you about. I will hand your enemy over to you so you can do to him whatever you desire. Like, let's get him. But what's David's response? He said, as the Lord is my witness, I would never do such a thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed. I will never lift my hand against him, since he is the Lord's anointed. And with these words, David persuaded his men and he did not let them rise up against Saul. That was unexpected behavior. Instead, David sneaks up on Saul and he takes a knife and he just cuts off the corner of Saul's robe. The fact is, he goes on to feel bad for even doing just that against Saul. And then Saul leaves the cave after he's done going to the bathroom, and David comes out. He bows before Saul, and he shows him the corner of the robe. He tells him, he says, I could have killed you back there, but I didn't. And he says, may the Lord judge between me and you, and may the Lord take vengeance on you for me, but my hand will never be against you. And Saul, he's surprised by David's unexpected kindness. Look what Saul says. You are more righteous than I, for you have done what is good to me, though I have done what is evil to you. When a man finds his enemy, does he just let him go unharmed? Saul calls off his mission and he returns home with his army. Now, that should have been the end of the story. Saul felt bad for his actions, and the two of them lived happily ever after. But if you know the story of David, you jump forward to chapter 26, we see that very quickly Saul is again hunting for David, trying to kill him. And isn't that just how it seems to happen with that person in your life that you have conflict with? You have some conversation with them, this really positive interaction. You feel like you had a breakthrough. Then the next week, they go right back to treating you ugly. We see that a very similar situation plays out all over again. Saul and his soldiers are asleep, and David and one of his best soldiers, they sneak into Saul's camp at night. And Abishai, he says to David, he says, today God has delivered your enemy to you. Let me thrust the spear through him into the ground just once. I won't have to strike him twice. Just like David's soldiers said in the cave. And you might have similar opportunities with your adversaries. Some friend of yours shows up to work carrying a tray full of coffees. Say, hey, this is this person's coffee. You want to spit in it? Or maybe something that's more realistic. I say, hey, look at this error that person made. This is your chance to make them look bad in front of the boss. But David, he doesn't give in to the pressure to take out his enemy. Look what David says. Don't destroy him, for who can lift a hand against the Lord's anointed and be innocent? As the Lord lives, the Lord will certainly strike him down. Either his day will come and he will die of natural causes, or he will go into battle and perish. However, as the Lord is my witness, I will never lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. And just like before, David takes a couple items close by Saul just to prove to him that he could have killed him if he wanted to. This behavior is so unexpected. God had chosen David as the future king, and he had multiple opportunities to speed that process up. But instead, he showed mercy to his adversary, the one who's trying to kill him. David's character, it's displayed even more at the beginning of 2 Samuel. Saul, he goes out into battle against the Philistines, and he's wounded in battle. He's mortally wounded, sitting there bleeding out, and he asks a soldier to finish him off with a sword. The soldier, he kills Saul. He takes his crown and he delivers it back to David. He lets him know that Saul is dead. And what does David say in that moment? Oh, thank God! That grumpy old man finally got what he deserved. I hope he suffered while he died. He doesn't do any of that. Instead, David mourned Saul's death. He cried. He fasted, ripped his clothes. And the man who brought David the crown, the one who had finished Saul off, David killed him with a sword for raising his hand against the king. This is such surprising behavior. David's actions, they go against what is natural to us as humans. What were the motivations behind David's actions? What was he thinking in the very moment that he's hiding in the cave? Well, fortunately, David was not just a warrior, but he was also a poet. He wrote several songs at the very time that all of these events were taking place. And these journals of his, these reflections of his heart, they've been preserved for us in the book of Psalms. See several of them that David writes at this time. Psalm 57, in fact, it has the note starting at the psalm. It says this: it was written when David fled before Saul into the cave. This week I was studying these psalms. I noticed three things that David regularly wrote about when he was running from Saul. The first thing is that David prayed to God. David was regularly praying to God. And these psalms that he wrote, they're the poetic form of David's prayers. Look what he writes in Psalm 34. He says, I sought the Lord, and he answered me and rescued me from all my fears. Those who look to him are radiant with joy. Their faces will never be ashamed. This poor man cried, and the Lord heard him and saved him from all his troubles. In the midst of this time, he sought the Lord. He looked to the Lord. He cried out to the Lord. That's what he wrote in Psalm 54. Pleads to God, God, save me by your name and vindicate me by your might. God, hear my prayer. Listen to the words from my mouth. For strangers rise up against me, and violent men intend to kill me. We should take the issues that we have in our life to God because he cares for us. But I confess with me sometimes when I'm facing these trials, these adversaries, when I feel wronged and upset about how someone has treated me, too often I'm quick to share these troubles with everyone else around me about this injustice that I'm experiencing. My first response isn't to turn to God and ask him for help in the situation. My first response isn't always to pray to him to guide me and to vindicate me. Second, we see that David praised God. David prayed to God and David praised God. Throughout the Psalms that are written in this season, David is regularly declaring the traits of God that he knew to be true. What he wrote in Psalm 54, God is my helper. The Lord is the sustainer of my life. I will praise your name, Lord, because it is good. Think about these songs that we sing. It should be the very words that are replaying in our mind as we go through these trials, that God is faithful to his promises, that God is my anchor that holds me to the ground. And even when David was in the midst of despair, he praised God for what he would do. Look what he says. This is while he's on the run. He says, my heart is confident. God, my heart is confident. I will sing. I will sing praises. Jumping down to 10. For your faithful love is as high as the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches the clouds. God, be exalted above the heavens. Let your glory be over the whole earth. He shares with God these trials that he's having, and then he prays God for what he would do. For us in our life, we can say, hey, you know what? My circumstances do not feel good, but I know that God is good. The way this person is treating me, it's unjust, but I know that God is just. I feel forgotten. I feel unseen. But I know that God sees all things. And he tells me that there's not even a hair that falls from my head without him noticing. Oh, friend, when we have the right perspective of God, it gives us the right perspective of the situation going on around us. There is no mountain that is too large when we think about the God who can move mountains. And finally, David praying to God and David reflecting on who God is, this led David to trust God. Throughout these Psalms, in the middle of this situation, David is declaring over and over his trust in God. Look at what he says. Psalm 37, he says, commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will act, making your righteousness shine like the dawn and your justice like the noonday. Be silent before the Lord and wait expectantly for him. For evildoers will be destroyed, but those who put their hope in the Lord will inherit the land. David prayed to God about his trials. He knew that God was good, and instead of taking matters into his own hand, he just sat back and trusted God's plan. He said throughout chapters 24 and 26, he says, God will get vengeance for me. If God wants to strike him down, then God will. I'm not doing evil to this guy. But oftentimes, trusting in God, it looks like waiting. Not getting anxious to see some change happen right now. Trusting God's timing. David says the same thing in Psalm 57. This is what he writes. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart be courageous. Wait for the Lord. And for David, he waited almost 2 decades between the time he was anointed king and when that actually happened. And friend, in your situation, the truth is we may not ever see our adversaries receive the justice that they deserve. Throughout history, there have been God-fearing people that have been killed by their enemies. But the Bible tells us that this life is not the end of the story, and that God will bring justice, if not in this life, in the one to come. And not only did David not take action against Saul, he tried to not even let Saul's actions bother him. Look what he wrote in Psalm 37. Do not be agitated by one who prospers in his way, by the person who carries out evil plans. Refrain from anger and give up your rage. Do not be agitated. It can only bring harm. You allowing your adversary to make you so upset, it's just bringing you harm. You're giving that person control over you, even when they're not around you. May we trust God so much that we're not even bothered by that person in our life. And look, of course, this situation affected David. He wouldn't have wrote so many passionate psalms about them if they didn't. But through all of his trials, he gave it over to God in prayer. He praised God for who he is, and he trusted God's plan, and he trusted God's timing. And this gave David the freedom to treat his adversary in an unexpected way. When we see these actions that David took, he revealed that he is a man after God's own heart. When we zoom out and we look at the whole Bible, we see that Jesus is the Son of God. When he came to this earth, he displayed God's heart perfectly. When we look at Jesus' life, we see that he treated his adversaries also in a very unexpected way. Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. He said, "You're blessed when people insult you." He said, "You're blessed when people say false things about you." Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount. He says, if someone sues you to take your shirt, then go get your jacket and give it to them as well. Jesus taught us to love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. And not only did Jesus Christ, our Savior, say these things, but he also practiced them. Just the day before his death, he knelt down and humbly washed the feet of Judas, supposed friend who he knew was about to betray him. He goes off to the garden to pray about this upcoming situation. And there the soldiers, they come to arrest Jesus. They're led by Judas. And some of his followers, they pull their sword. They're about to defend Jesus for this injustice. And Jesus, very calmly, he says, "Put your sword away. I'm going to trust the path that God has laid out for me." And then those soldiers, they falsely accused Jesus, and they nailed him to a wooden cross. With his back beaten, crown of thorns shoved into his head, publicly shamed. And what was Jesus' response? "This is so unfair. Don't you know that I'm a good person? I deserve to be treated better than this." "Oh, you just wait. You're about to get what's coming to you." The Bible says that Jesus was silent before his accusers. And he looked on these soldiers that just nailed him to the cross. And he says, "Father, forgive them, for they don't even know what they're doing." Very rarely will someone sacrifice their life for a friend of theirs. But we might find some stories of a good friend doing just that. But Jesus proves his love for us in this. While we were living as his adversaries, rebels to his ways, Jesus willingly laid down his life for us, purchasing our reconciliation to God the Father. So often it is our desire to get justice for wrongs that have been done to us. But do you know what justice is for us? It's Jesus going free and us paying the penalty for our sin. Praise Jesus that he did not act like we do. And because he has forgiven us so great a debt, he calls on us to follow in his example. He tells us to forgive others their trespasses in the same way that he has forgiven us our trespasses. As we wrap up, I want you to think back to that person in your life that makes your day-to-day quite difficult. I want to challenge you this week. Think about one way that you can treat your adversary in an unexpected way. When that person or those who know about how this person has treated you, when they're caught off guard by your unexpected behavior, they ask you, why are you being so kind to that person who's been treating you like that? May you use that as an opportunity to point them to Jesus, the one who has first loved you.